as Jeff mentioned, we are going to be recording the first part of the morning with Steve's presentation. The discussion after, we won't be recording. So if folks are okay with that, that's how our morning will go. So I'll start over. So Steve was injured in an industrial accident in 1978, losing his left arm. He went through the WCB system and saw firsthand how it failed for many injured workers. In 1984, he helped found the Thunder Bay and District Injured Worker Support Group. He has been active ever since, working to improve the lives of injured and disabled workers across Canada, both through increasing the awareness of the barriers many disabled workers face and organizing self-help groups to address those barriers. He is presently the chair of the Research Action Committee of the Ontario Network of Injured Worker Groups. And Steve sent me this bio. I think this is a modest bio. Steve is a well-known worker advocate. He's well-known throughout Canada, and he works tirelessly and effortlessly to help injured workers. So we're just honored and grateful to have him. Steve's presentation will probably take about 45 minutes, maybe a bit longer, give or take. We will have time for questions. So both Jeff and I will be monitoring the chat. If folks have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will get to them at the end of the presentation. And then after Steve's presentation this morning, we'd really like to have an informal discussion for those folks who'd like to participate and stay. We would really appreciate that. Our goal is really to provide a safe space for injured workers and allies to really share and explore what next steps might be like with regards to injured worker support here in Manitoba. You know, what can injured workers, allies, and supporters do now? So we hope that you'll stay with us for this conversation. Steve will be able to stay with us for a bit, and both Jeff and myself, who are nurses here at the OHC, will be available for that as well. And as I mentioned before, we're recording this. We'll post it to the website shortly. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are presenting this session on Treaty 1 territory, where the Occupational Health Center is located, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Occupational Health Center acknowledges that we are all treaty people and recognize the history and impacts of colonization on Indigenous peoples. We commit ourselves to active accountability, justice, equity, and reconciliation. And for those folks in the crowd who are not aware of who we are, the MFL Occupational Health Center was established many years ago in 1983 to meet the need for quality, accessible, and comprehensive services on workplace health and safety. So that need continues today. Here at the OHC, we help workers, employers, and joint health and safety committees to improve workplace health and safety conditions and eliminate hazards. Our services are available free of charge, and to find out more information about who we are and what we do, I encourage you to check out our website. So having said that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand the baton to Steve, and welcome, Steve.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks to the folks at the Occupational Health Center. It's a real pleasure to be working with you guys. You know, just when you did the land acknowledgement and shared the slide of the Northern Lights, I looked at it and I saw the shape of Lake Superior, which is where we're located, you know, on the western end of Lake Superior here in Thunder Bay. And I thought, oh my gosh, the spirits are with us today. This is so great. So let's see if I can get the spirits of computers working here as well. All right, there we go. Is that working okay? All right, now, all right. Okay. All right. Yeah. So thank you so much for the invitation today. as I mentioned to Jeff and Lisa earlier, this is from my standpoint. You know, everything is seen through our eyes, and we interpret things as we go along. So I'm sure others can kind of add to it. And I notice Jules Tupker from our injured workers group in Thunder Bay is with us today. And I'm looking that he can help fill in anything I kind of miss along the way. And we're just really part of this movement for justice for workers who become injured or ill through their workplace experience. And, you know, and this goes over 100 years. So we're just kind of part of this long journey. And then, of course, it goes way before that as well. But I'm just going to cover a little bit of this history. I want to give you background about myself a little bit too. Lisa mentioned I lost my left arm in 1978. It was September 12th around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you know, in working construction, you oftentimes bounce around from job to job. And I was working for a small company here in Thunder Bay, really kind of a new hire, and we were lifting up a house in the rural area. The basement had been pushed in by the frost, and we were moving it off that basement and onto a new foundation. And we had completed the job. There was 2 of us doing the work, and my co-worker headed off to town to get supplies to go to the next job. We were starting the following day, and I was just cleaning up. And, you know, lifting houses, you have heavy equipment, big steel beams, and we had a big winch truck, and I was just winding the cable onto the drum, onto the winch. And the cable, if you keep it wound nice onto the drum, it's a wound cable, and if you don't, the cable will fracture and little pieces of wire will stick out. So, you know, I got my hand right there and I'm feeding it in so it goes on nice, and one of those little wires caught my glove on my left arm, left hand, and it started pulling into the winch. And, you know, when these things kind of happen, these traumatic accidents, you kind of go into shock right away. You know, it's I can't believe, you know, how I experienced that, because here, you know, the drum just moves very slowly, and I wasn't worried. I thought, oh, I can feed in the cable, I can get my hand free. Well, no, that didn't happen, and my arm goes in, and you know, the first thing that happens is my forearm, the bone breaks and it pops out of my arm. And I go, oh, damn, now I got to go to the hospital. Look at this. This is terrible. It's a bummer, you know. Well,
Bummer.
it just keeps going. You know, it keeps pulling me in, and I'm kind of going, oh my God, this is worse. This is, you know, after my arm, my head's going in, and that's it. I'm going to die. And I said, well, it's been a good life. Bye, everybody. And the next thing I know, I feel like someone puts their foot on my chest, and this bright light happens, this flash of light, and all of a sudden I'm laying on the ground. And my arm has been pulled off, and it's on the winch. And the winch is still going around. Well, it's September, I'm wearing a hoodie, and the sleeve is still attached, and it's now pulling me back into the winch again. So with my last bit of energy, I'm pulling and rips the sleeve off it, and I'm free. And that, you know, 5 or 6 seconds, whatever it took, totally changed my life. In many ways that I keep learning about. Here it is 45 years later. But those first months and weeks and days really impacted so much of my future. Like I was part of the kind of the back to the land movement back in the day. And our philosophy was that we wanted to support each other. We wanted to help each other build a new vision, really, of the future that saw people first rather than wealth and power and whatever that so much of our society was headed towards. So the owner comes along and finds me there, takes me to the hospital, and I spend the next 10 days in the hospital. And what happened was so many people came to visit me and support me that I couldn't, well, I don't know, I shouldn't say I couldn't, I wouldn't, whatever, a number of things happened. One was I was so happy I was alive. Like I thought I was going to die, so I'm alive, so there's already a success. And then here's these people bringing me books and food and fruit and friendship along the way. And towards the end of my stay in the hospital, I say to my surgeon, I say, Doc, I got to go. Like, this is enough time. Thanks for everything you've done, but I got to go home now. And he said, okay, well, you have to have a number of things in place. You have to have, I was a single guy, you have to have someone at your home who's going to help you do the things around your home for the next little while. And you need to talk to the prosthetist. This is the person that makes the artificial limbs. He said, because he knows what your future is going to be like. I said, great, send him up. So there's an older gentleman comes up and he introduces himself. And he says, so what kind of work do you do? I said, construction. I work carpentry. And he says, well, you'll never do that again. And I kind of went, well, I wondered what my future might be like. And oh my gosh, okay. Then he says, so what kind of hobbies do you have? I say, gardening. I love gardening. He said, well, you'll never do that again either. At this point now, the tears are running down my cheek and I want to punch this guy. What do you mean, say I can't do it? And he says, my advice to you is find a good woman who will look after you for the rest of your life. And he left. Well, I was crushed. I thought, oh my God, my life is over. Like, how can this be? Here's the expert. The surgeon told me he's the guy that knows. He says, here's the expert. Okay. Oh my gosh. Well, that was in the morning. In the afternoon, one of my neighbors comes in, Albert Gruno. And Albert says, Steve, enough laying around. Let's go. Let's get up and get going here. I said, yeah, okay. I'm trying to get going here, Albert. He says, no, he says, I'm serious. He says, next spring, he says, I want to build a new house and I want you to build the house for me. I said, Albert, what have you been smoking, man? Like, can't you see I just lost my arm? Like, what? He says, no. He says, I'm serious. Let's get going. And I want you to build my house. So here on this one day, I was offered two visions of my future. One from what I thought was, the medical community experts, and the other was from, a friend, a member of our community. And that really set the stage for me in many ways. After I got out of the hospital, WSIB, well, at that point it was Workers' Compensation Board kicked in with some financial aid, and they said, look, we have a rehabilitation hospital in Toronto. It was called the Downsview Hospital and Rehabilitation Center. We're going to bring you down here for an assessment, and this was kind of my introduction to workers' compensation. So this was maybe 6 weeks later. They bring me down to Toronto, and first they send me a letter that says, here's the rules for when you're going to be at the rehab center. And if you don't follow the rules, if you break the rules, you can lose entitlement to all your benefits. And there's a list of rules of things I had to do or follow. And you kind of go, well, what? Like, what's going on? And they arranged for a taxi to pick me up at the airport. The taxi takes me, and in we go. There's a big grounds, and all along the front is a cast iron fence, with pointy things on the top that's about 6 feet high. And then there's one driveway in, and there's a guardhouse there. Okay. You come in, and right away there's a table set up with a guy in a uniform. And I go, well, geez, there's another guard there. What's this? And then, geez, I was smoking at the time. I'm going to step outside and have a smoke. There's a big long line of people waiting to get signed in. I walk over to where the trees are and see, geez, here's a big chain link fence with barbed wire on the top facing in. And I kind of walk around, and so the grounds are fenced off with this big fence with a barbed wire in the top, and on the front it's got the 6 foot high pointy things. And I'm kind of going, where am I? Like, am I here to be helped, or am I being, am I in prison, or like, what the heck is going on? While I was there for 3 weeks for an assessment. I was treated the best. I was an amputee. They had special places for amputees. In our hospital ward, where our beds were, we only had 6 guys to a room. The rest of the folks who weren't entitled to special care had 10 people sleeping in the same room. And as I met other people and talked to them, there was this overriding concern that you were here to be assessed not only for your injury, but whether it was real. Whether, in fact, maybe you were faking it, and we were here watching to assess and see whether you were a legitimate worker or not. And right away, I went, this is not right. Like, people are here to be helped, not to be put under suspicion and to be treated, less than you would in any other part of our healthcare system. And that really set me on a path. It said, like, we need to have a system that is really going to help people. And I heard that there was a union of injured workers based in Toronto. I tried to get a hold of folks when I was in Toronto. There was I really couldn't find anybody. When I returned to Thunder Bay, I heard that there had been a group in Thunder Bay of injured worker support group. I tracked down the fellow who had been in charge and talked to his wife, and she said, leave him alone. He's got so many people asking for him help. Just leave him alone. He's overwhelmed already. And so I kind of went, well, I don't know what to do. So I let that alone. And then I looked around and said, okay, who's going to hire a one-armed carpenter? And no one was coming forward. And I said, okay, I'll start a little construction company. And the first job was to build that house for my neighbor, for Al Gruno, in the following year, in 1979. So the injured worker world kind of left behind, and I just focused on carrying on with my life and my career, and managed a small little construction company doing renovations, occasionally new houses. And then in January of 1984, there was an advertisement in the local newspaper that said, the Ontario government is planning to take away your pensions if you're an injured worker. At this time I had a pension. I was getting $600 a month. And I went, "You're going to take away my pension for what?" They said, "Come, there's a public meeting at the Prince Arthur Hotel downtown in Thunder Bay." So I went, and the room was packed. It had maybe 150 people. And there was a legal worker from Toronto that came up and shared what was happening in the Ontario legislature, that there was a bill being proposed that would take away the pensions of all workers who had permanent impairments in Ontario and replace it with a new wage law system, or a projected wage law system, where they would project what wages you might get and then determine your benefits based on that. Well, pretty much unanimously, the folks in the room said, "No, that's not something we want to go with." And we started our Thunder Bay Injured Workers Support Group. And I'm going to come back to talk a little bit about that. But along my own journey, about 10 years into running my own construction company, I was having more trouble with my back and my right arm. And I remembered that prosthetist who said, "No, you can't do construction," but I'm a kind of a stubborn guy. And I went, "Oh, okay, well, maybe I need to look around for something that's less physically demanding." And I got recruited to go work for the March of Dimes in Thunder Bay that provides assistance to people with disabilities, and became the manager of their book rehab program in 1988. And our injured worker group was organizing, and we were part of starting a provincial organization in 1990. In 1991, I was appointed to the Workers' Compensation Board of Directors, and got to see the system from another side. I'd already seen it as an injured worker, seen it as an employer. I see it from our injured workers group. I saw it from the rehabilitation angle, and now I'm seeing it from the management, from the board of directors, who's in charge of the $1 billion budget. We continued organizing as well and helped form the national organization, the Canadian Injured Workers Alliance, in 1990. And I served as the first president, and then went to work for them in 1996 as the lead hand there. During that time, we started doing research on what really happens to injured workers, and this led to a large research collaboration, the Research Action Alliance, on the consequences of work injury, that went from 2004 to 2012. And following that, our Ontario Network of Injured Workers Group formed our own research action committee to continue that work, and it continues to this day. So coming back to our Thunder Bay group that started in January of 1984. We're all just injured workers. We were being helped by a lawyer at the Kinaway Community Legal Clinic here in Thunder Bay. He did representation for injured workers. He knew about the Workers' Compensation Board. And they said he would help us for 6 months to get our feet on the ground. They would provide a space for us to meet. He would chair meetings to make sure that everybody would have an opportunity to participate that wanted to. And then after 6 months, you're on your own, more or less. So there was about 15 of us that came together after that big meeting at the Port Arthur Hotel, and we talked about what did we want to do and what is our focus. And we said there's 3 main things that we want to do as a group. We want to provide information and support to other injured workers and their families. We wanted to do public education so other people knew how the system worked. And we would do systemic advocacy, really starting with this new legislation that was being proposed to take away our pensions. So, we started by just learning about compensation ourselves. there was almost no one in town in Thunder Bay that knew much of anything about how workers' compensation worked. We got a copy of the act, the Workers' Compensation Act. We got a copy of the policy manual, and we kind of divided it up. And you take this section, and you take this section, and you take this section. You read it, and come back and tell us what it says. And then we share our personal experiences on those same issues. So here's what the law says. Here's what the policy says. Here's what happened to me in that same situation. Over time, we've continued this work, and that information and support really takes place in a number of different ways. It's all about peer support. We're not the experts. We're people who know something. We've had all these experiences. We have personal lived experience, and we're here to share those with each other and to listen. A lot of that is that one-on-one support, and it can happen in the supermarket. It can happen in organized places. Lots of times it happens over the phone. We would also do group gatherings where people would come together and share those experiences together, which we really liked because it provides more and more views on our experiences. And they've morphed into, over the last 3 years, when the pandemic struck, we went online. And we were meeting every Tuesday morning in person. We started saying, okay, we can't do that. We can't see each other physically. And we started gathering online, and we continue to this day. We meet every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock Eastern time, and provide information and support. In terms of our public education, there's a number of things we try to do. One is we try to get media coverage. We try to get the word out into the larger community about our experiences and what's happening and things that are changing going forward. We try to involve ourselves in the community in a number of different ways. We make presentations to different groups. We participate in other social justice groups. And we now have an awards night that we have once a year, and provide awards and a dinner and a social time together. We annually celebrate important dates. The National Day of Mourning coming up April 28th. Injured Workers Day is a day that we started on Ontario. It spread into some of the other provinces, and is now being followed in Australia, where we've made links with activists in Australia as well. And Labor Day, of course, is a traditional day for all labor, which we participate in as well. In terms of our systemic advocacy, we meet with our elected officials. It doesn't matter what party they're part of. If they're there representing us in our government, we want to talk to them about what our experiences are and how we can improve the systems, the public systems we have for all workers. We meet with the management at the WCB. It's now called the WSIB, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. And we try to build relationships along the way and create working groups and discussion areas where we can bring the lived experience of injured workers to the table with those people that make those policies. We use the media as well as a way to influence the public discourse and the things that our politicians know about and hear about. And we work closely with allies and are always looking to build links with new and other groups. Organized labor has always been the first group that we approached, but there's all kinds of other groups, other people with disabilities, other social justice groups, you name it, church groups, anyone that says, hey, what's going on with you guys? Let's talk. And we're right there to talk. We also saw that from Thunder Bay, here we are, we're just this little group out in the middle of nowhere compared to Toronto and the Golden Horseshoe down there. We thought we need to really work together with folks all across Ontario workers' compensation is a provincial jurisdiction. So we started reaching out. We held a conference in Thunder Bay in 1988, bringing all the folks we could find who were active in this realm together to educate ourselves and to meet each other and learn. We finally founded an organization 3 years later in 1991. Presently, we have about 22 local groups across the province. Our provincial group really is that umbrella organization to bring us together to strengthen our voice with government. We still are active in Thunder Bay, but we're also active through our provincial organization as well. Pretty well everything that we do is volunteer driven. The provincial group has a very small budget. You can see $4,000 to $12,000 a year, but it has made real gains both in the individual lives of workers as well as how the system works. A little bit about workers' compensation is important, and I'm kind of a history buff. That's what I took in university, and understanding that workers' compensation was really our first part of our social safety net can be really helpful to understand how it works and how it has changed over the years and its role in our safety net for folks who need help along the way. And this really came about in 1910. Industrialization was really happening big time. More and more people were getting injured and killed. The only recourse was to go to the courts, and the courts were starting to actually provide generous settlements. So industry was kind of going, well, I don't know what's going on here. We have got to protect ourselves. And the government struck a royal commission and appointed Sir William Meredith to head the commission. So over the next 3 years or so, he held hearings. We've got transcripts of all those hearings and studied them. He's looked in other jurisdictions, and in 1913 submits his first draft. Later that year submits his final report. It gets passed in the legislature in 1914, and 1915 becomes the first Workers' Compensation Board as we understand them today in Canada. Here's a picture of Sir William Meredith. He was very active in the Conservative Party in Ontario. He was the Chief Justice for many years. He was the leader of the provincial party for a while. He was a member of the provincial parliament, the Legislative Assembly, a lawyer, and so he was no raging radical at all. You know, he was just trying to say, let's have stability in our economy and in our society. The main principles that he brought forth that were adopted in law was that there would be compensation for the worker as long as the disability lasts, that there would be a collective liability and the employer would pay for this. The employer is legally responsible to protect the health and the safety of workers. The collective liability means that it's not up to that individual business to cover those costs, because the economy is all interrelated. So it's the economy overall that has that liability, and they would spread the financial liability across industry to pay for these costs. That there would be no fault. He saw that going through the courts was really a lose-lose oftentimes. It didn't really bring justice. It made one person a winner, the other person a loser, but even the winners oftentimes weren't winners after this long court battle. And so we want to have it as no fault. You don't have to prove that someone was at fault. It would be administered by an independent agency, and it would be non-adversarial, unlike what's happening in the courts where it is adversarial, and you have to fight it out. He said, let's not have the fights. Let's just look after those people who become injured and disabled. Our present situation in Ontario, it's interesting as well to really understand the scope here. And we have been active with academic researchers for the last 25 years documenting this. So there's 15 to 20,000 serious injuries and illnesses that end up with permanent impairments, permanent disabilities every year. Of those, 45% end up unemployed 3 to 5 years post-injury. That almost that same number end up either in poverty or near poverty. If you're unemployed and you're a worker with a disability, you're like the other folks in Canada with disabilities, your chances are a good chance that you're going to be living in poverty. But what we found is only 20% of these folks end up receiving long-term benefits from the WCB, the WSIB. And that's why they're ending up in poverty. And that a large portion of this 15 to 20,000 people, almost half, end up with mental health challenges following their experiences. And this has really driven us to kind of say, okay, we need to focus on this group of people. It's the people with the long-term injuries, the long-term disabilities. You break your arm, it heals, you're back to work after 6 weeks. There's no impairment, everything goes on. That's great. The system works pretty good in many of those cases. It's where there's a long-term, permanent impairment that the system starts breaking down. And this idea of this wage loss is set up so that some person that doesn't even know you gets to say how much money you're going to make for the rest of your life and subtract that from what you were making pre-injury and say that's what you're entitled to. Quite often, the analysis is that you could make as much as you made beforehand, so you're getting no benefits at all. Or you went back to work. So we're closing the case, you're making your money. We're not going to pay attention that 6 months later you may lose your job because you can't hold it anymore, or that you get hurt a second or third time, which happens over and over again. We're not going to pay attention to that. We already made our decision, you're done. That return to work process oftentimes is done with that in mind, that it's a cost saving that to the system and to the employers. So we're just going to get you back to work no matter how we do it, and then we can just close the file and move on to the next folks. We also said, look, we really need to track what happens to these workers. Like the system doesn't. We've reached out to all the compensation boards across Canada 30 years ago and said, can you tell us what happens to workers long term? And not a single one said, this is what happens. They said, we don't know. And even a couple of them said, well, once you find out, let us know. And we try to do that. And the mental health piece is such a big piece. To add that mental illness piece on top of the physical disability and limitations, that is an issue that we've continued to really focus on. We've been advocating around doing research on this. The one study was in 2012, found that 45% of workers with a permanent impairment. We worked with the Workers' Compensation Board to take a randomized sample of people with a permanent impairment. And then that 45% ended up with mostly depression, but other mental health issues as well. The Institute for Work and Health just last year published a study where they also did a randomized sample from the WSIB. They didn't break it down by permanent impairment. They said anyone with a lost time claim was part of this study. They found that of those 60,000 workers that have a lost time claim in Ontario, over 16% end up with mental illness because of how they're treated by their case managers at the WSIB in Ontario. Both those numbers, I think, end up pretty close because it's those folks with the longer term injury have those longer relationships and the more adversarial relationships along the way. Here's a little example. One of the workers that was working in our big research project. She said, I feel sometimes like I'm in a shell, like a little nut in a shell, because it's so hard. You don't want to burden anybody or complain about your pain. You don't want to. They don't understand sometimes. They're tired of you to complain. Pain, 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 pain. I know if they had paid me my money, I would have taken care of my body, my health. I would be at a company working today if they had given me the right medical care. Maybe I would be there, who knows? Maybe I would be in a better field or a different field. I wouldn't be sitting here today in this kind of agony because they made my condition worse by not paying my money, by not allowing me medical care. These are the kind of stories that we hear in our support over and over. And one of the things we said is we want to create a vision of how the system should work. And we developed a platform for change that oftentimes went back to those principles that Sir William Meredith came forward with back in the early 1900s. That there is real collective liability. This has been undercut by the experience rating programs. That the primary purpose is really to help and compensate workers. That, yeah, for sure, it should be no fault. We're seeing more and more litigious activity. Compensation should reflect the full income loss. It should eliminate that deeming that says, we'll tell you how much you lost, rather than saying, what's the reality? What have you actually lost? That's what we need to make up. That there should be coverage for full cost of living. And now everyone's worried about cost of living today. This has been something we've been working for 40 years. And that when people turn 65 and retire officially, that they have a decent economic income. That rehabilitation needs to be in partnership with the worker. That there needs to be hands-on help in terms of helping employers find suitable accommodations. And that we think that there should be a public quality rehab service. In our advocacy, we've gone to the courts. We've done lots of things to improve the lives of injured workers, their financial security. Our first big victory was 2003, when we went to the Supreme Court of Canada. Injured workers filled the courtroom, and it was a case around chronic pain disability, and out of Nova Scotia, in fact, and we won that case. Quick list of things. When Mike Harris came in 1995, he said, I'm going to get rid of chronic pain policies to the WCB. We resisted that, and that was one of the things in his common sense revolution he wasn't able to bring in. Another was to reduce our amount of an independent appeal system by making this mega tribunal. We resisted that and won that as well. We gained the right for people to have maintenance therapy ongoing. You have a permanent impairment, a disability, you may need help with your physio or chiro or massage. We got them to reconsider some of their return to work policies. That issue of the cost of living in 2007, that one win there, when they put it onto their books, that was $750 million. That was one of the things we won along the way. We created this big partnership, the Research Action Alliance on the Consequences of Work Injury, 2004 to 2012. We had 6 different universities participating, 25 research studies, that really documented what really happens to workers and recommendations about how we can make improvements. We finally got full cost of living restored in 2018, and we've been participating through the United Nations process on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, bringing our issues forward into the international stage. In terms of as we move forward and as we learn, we kind of go, how we talk about our issues is so important. And a couple of things that are coming to the fore now is to really focus on restoring injured workers' health. And that really, our health is dependent on many things. When we look at the determinants of health, income, employment, engagement are all big parts of that. Injured workers so often are left alone, are isolated, and that really has detrimental impacts on their health. And really to protect all workers in terms of their health and safety is the other key narrative we're talking about. And working together with allies, our platform for change, it was that vision, creating that vision for the future that we can share at a moment's notice. It's on our website. We're there. We want to make it better for all workers. One of the issues is that we see workers' compensation moving towards kind of managed healthcare, where the doctors and the healthcare providers that we rely on are oftentimes overruled by the bureaucracy at the compensation board, and it really breaks down. You know, here we're taught to trust our medical professionals, and we do. And then when we're told, oh, don't listen to them, they don't know what they're talking about. We're the ones who are going to decide your future. It creates all kinds of problems, including those mental health problems. Kind of want to wrap up with another story from an injured worker of what it's like oftentimes. And he says, to tell the truth, this is Rosario Costa, an Italian immigrant who came to work and live in Ontario. To tell the truth, you never can believe how an injured worker can feel to be out of the workforce. You feel destroyed by society. You feel like nothing in family because, you know, at the beginning, the wife, the children, they have compassion. They say, oh, poor daddy, poor my husband. But when the story is too long, if he is disabled for life, there's the problem comes because, you know, the wives at the beginning, they do a lot of things, but then they finish the patients. The wife has to shoulder everything and run the house. The children, they have to stop school to help the family. So everybody gets nervous. That's an understatement. Everybody gets nervous. I just want to wrap up on that. I want to give you some links. I'm happy to talk to folks further. There's my email address. There's our website for the Thunder Bay Injured Workers. The website for Injured Workers Online, based out of Toronto. It's one of the best resources on workers' compensation, I think, in Canada. We're working with folks at Lakehead University. They've created a new research center. It's called Enhancing Prevention of Injury and Disability at Work, EPID. It's a new research center, and they're working through Northwestern Ontario and Manitoba. And we're actively involved in that project. And we're also involved in the Disability in Work Canada initiative that brings together a number of different disability organizations and focus on how we can improve the outcomes for people with disabilities and provide sustainable employment with career options moving forward. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your time. And geez, I went over.